al-Assad stresses during his meeting with al-Brahimi that the success of any political action depends upon stopping the support of terrorist groups and putting pressure on the countries financing them. The Syrian Arab army eliminates dozens of terrorists in the countryside of Damascus, Idlib, Aleppo and Homs. Hundreds of citizens in al-Moadamiyeh were evacuated into safe centers after being held under siege by armed terrorist groups. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our news for today. President Bashar al-Assad today received Lakhdar al-Brahimi, the UN Secretary General's special representative, and the delegation accompanying him. President al-Assad was briefed by Mr. al-Brahimi on the latter's tour of a number of countries in the region within the framework of the current preparations for the convention of the International Conference in Geneva. President al-Assad affirmed that the success of any political solution depends on halting the support offered to the terrorist groups and pressuring the states that sponsor such groups and facilitate the entrance of terrorists and mercenaries into Syria and present to them funds, weapons and all forms of logistic support. His Excellency pointed out that this would represent the most important step towards creating the appropriate circumstances for dialogue and setting the necessary clear mechanisms to realize the aspired for objectives from such dialogue. President al-Assad said the Syrian people are the only side authorized to delineate Syria's future, and any solution that may be reached or agreed upon must win the approval of the Syrians and reflect their desire away from foreign interventions. On his part, Mr. al-Brahimi talked about the efforts exerted for the convention of the Geneva Conference, adding that they focus on providing the Syrians with ways to meet and agree on a solution to solve the crisis as soon as possible and outline an initial visualization of Syria's future. Head of the International Relations Committee at the Russian Federal Council, Mikhail Margilov, has affirmed that the decree of general pardon issued by President al-Assad yesterday contributes in an earnest way to settling the situation in Syria. Margilov said the Syrian leadership has implemented its program on time, adding that the Russian proposal to dismantle the chemical weapons has removed the danger of the so-called red lines, which the West had considered as a pretext for carrying out a military strike against Syria. Moreover, Margilov added the Western leaders were denied internal support in their own countries for their schemes against Syria. He said preparations are underway for the Geneva II conference, which is particularly important because the extremist terrorist groups have refrained from participating therein. Syria's permanent representative to the UN, Dr. Bashar al-Jaafari, has reiterated Syria's condemnation of the coercive measures imposed by the USA and the European Union on the Syrian people, branding such measures as a flagrant violation of the principles of international law.
Reading out Syria's statement at the UN General Assembly meeting on the need to end the economic, trade and financial blockade imposed by Washington on Cuba, Syria's permanent representative to the UN, Bashar al-Jaafari, underlined the negative impact of such unilateral, hostile, illegitimate and coercive measures on the part of the USA and the European Union. Al-Jaafari stressed Syria's full support for the Cuban government and friendly people in the face of the unjust American blockade. The siege imposed on Cuba for many decades, Dr. Al-Jaafari said, has formed an unacceptable precedent that contravenes international law. It has harmed Cuba and its people in many ways and put the USA in direct confrontation with an international consensus in rejection of such a blockade. Al-Jaafari pointed out that the unilateral coercive measures imposed by the USA and the European Union represent a flagrant violation of international law, a tool to strengthen Western hegemony on other states and peoples, and a means of political and economic coercion. Its aims, Dr. Al-Jaafari warned, at affecting the independent political national decision-making and interfering in the internal affairs of the UN member states in a way that runs counter to the provisions of the UN Charter. Dr. Al-Jaafari stressed that such measures reflect the policy of collective punishment pursued by those states, affirming that such measures would only ignite anti-West feelings.
Welcome back. In Damascus countryside, the Syrian Arab army eliminated a terrorist gang which attacked a military point in Khan al-Sheikh farms, killing and injuring dozens and confiscating their weapons. The army also targeted terrorist gangs east of Deir Atiyeh, south of Yabrud, north of Al-Nabak, south of Al-Nasiriyah, and west of Al-Sarkha, destroying their weapons, including a mortar gun, south of Al-Sharif Mosque in Adr al-Balad. In al-Moadamiyeh city in Damascus countryside, the Ministry of Social Affairs, in cooperation with Damascus Governorate, evacuated hundreds of women and children who were detained by terrorists under the threat of force. They have been transported to refugee centers and provided with medical and humanitarian support. The Minister of Social Affairs, Dr. Kinda al-Shammat, described the situation in al-Moadamiyeh as being tragic due to terrorist acts perpetrated by the gunmen and the siege they imposed on the residential areas. The people of Al-Moadamiyeh expressed their gratitude for the evacuation operation and thanked the Syrian Arab army for helping them to get out of the horrible siege imposed upon them. They described the situation as being very tragic due to the lack of food and medicine. In Homs, a terrorist gang attacked the village of Shallouh in Tel Kalakh countryside, committing a massacre in which 13 citizens were killed. In Aleppo countryside, the Syrian Arab army confronted an armed terrorist group which tried to attack the cities of Nubbul and Al-Zahra and foiled an infiltration attempt into Salah ad-Din neighborhood. Syrian Arab army units destroyed terrorist gatherings and confiscated their weapons north of Al-Ramoun, Al-Sfera and the central prison surroundings. In Idlib suburbs, the Syrian Arab army has eliminated terrorist groups linked to the so-called Ahrar Sham and Al-Abbas brigade in Jabal al-Arba'in in Ariha. Among the killed, the deputy leader of the so-called Al-Abbas brigade, Yahya Abu al-Munzir, as well as Muhammad Jnaid and Mahmoud Abu al-Munzir were identified. The Syrian Arab army also killed 10 terrorists and injured others west of the city of Idlib. It destroyed 2 vehicles loaded with weapons and ammunition. On the other hand, several terrorists were killed or injured during clashes between 2 terrorist groups, which caused the explosion of 4 tanks filled with stolen diesel in Ma'arrat al-Nasan near Taftanaz.